Well, it looks like I have the honor of being your first in-person speaker in Morelia, so thank you. All right, so how many of you have heard some of the controversies around veganism or debated or heard debates about lab-grown meat or the Impossible Burger, things like that? Yeah, it's a hot topic right now and definitely a controversial one. I'm talking today about how veganism is still very much a solution if we care about freedom. So, co-option. This is a term that, when I explain it, many of you might have heard of it, but maybe hadn't put that definition or that term to it. Co-option is basically, in terms of a justice or political movement, this is when other entities, such as corporations, individuals, government, or anyone that has an agenda different than the movement, when they basically come in and kind of take over the movement and redirect resources, funding, focus, and attention onto other activities and things that aren't actually in alignment with the core values of that movement, but that serve other agendas, personal agendas, and especially corporate profits. So this is what's happening right now in the vegan movement. It's something we have to look out for in a lot of movements, especially those that challenge fundamental paradigms and establishment narratives that are crucial to profit in our current system. And so this is happening with veganism. But veganism does not equal promoting the Impossible Burger or lab-grown meat or biotech solutions. A couple months back, Bill Gates came out saying something like 100% of rich nations should switch to 100% synthetic meat. Does anybody remember hearing or seeing that? Yeah, and this stirred up a lot of controversy, right? So a bunch of people basically kind of got the idea from Bill Gates saying this, from things like the new Kentucky Fried Beyond Nuggets, and basically the World Economic Forum even talking about veganism, or the United Nations promoting or saying something about veganism. A lot of people kind of walk away from that thinking that they're pushing veganism on us, and they're pushing these corporatized, unhealthy solutions or products. That's what veganism is, and they want to force all of us to, do this or eat these certain products, right? So this was an article on the World Economic Forum's website. So all of that has been happening, but none of that is actually veganism. This is where these corporations have come in and they've seen a trend. Veganism and interest in plant-based diets has been growing rapidly over the last few years. Many people have started learning about the problems of the meat and dairy industry. And those problems are very real. But these corporations or people like Bill Gates come in, they're not actually concerned about those problems, and they're not actually concerned about finding solutions. They just see momentum and are looking for a way to co-opt that and use it for their profit. And one way you can kind of look and notice this is that Bill Gates, nor any of these other corporations or companies like Tyson that are investing in the Impossible and these other products, none of them are actually talking about what ethical veganism actually is, and none of them are talking about the importance and what a healthy, whole foods, plant-based diet can do. They are only talking about the technological and new product-based solutions that they happen to have a stake in and have a way to make money from. You can patent lab-grown meat and new technology for growing meat in a lab from a few cells. You can't patent organic beans and vegetables that anyone can grow. That's the difference here, right? So if this isn't veganism and you're learning about veganism from maybe the people that are actually co-opting and corporatizing what was once a grassroots movement, what is veganism then? So veganism as a term was first coined in 1945 1924 by Donald Watson and his wife, Dorothy Watson. And they were the founders of the first vegan society in the UK. And the official definition from the Vegan Society in the UK is the word veganism denotes a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose. So you'll notice that veganism is not actually a diet. That's one of the biggest misconceptions. It's not a diet, and it actually says very little about the healthfulness of your diet or what one eats, other than who we don't eat. That's what is really going on with veganism here. And this gets confused a lot, and I think a really good comparison is if we think about a conversation about eating cats and dogs, or elephants, animals that here at least in the United States and Canada and probably many people in Mexico as well, we don't consider those animals to be food. So a conversation about people, not wanting to see those animals eaten, or wanting to protect elephants in Africa, or being concerned about the Yulin Dog Meat Festival in China, we don't immediately assume that those people are healthy. We don't immediately make any assumptions about what their diet is. We don't immediately make any assumptions about whether they are against a corporatized food system. They are essentially separate issues. Now, the reason we view these differently is because eating cats and dogs is not normal to most of us, and we simply do not view them as food. So we don't discuss whether it's healthy or sustainable to eat them or not. None of that. And that's what's different here, is that we still live in a system of normalized violence where we view other animals like cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys as food. So veganism is essentially saying, let's take that paradigm where we don't view cats and dogs as food and extend our circle of compassion outwards to include those other currently farmed animals in our circle of care and compassion. Now, a few years back, before the corporatization and co-option of veganism had really taken hold, there were, I think, a lot more essentially radical and holistic vegans. And that's because to go vegan in the 1950s or even 1960s and up until quite recently, you had to be very, very willing to buck all social norms and to go against the conditioning in our society and recognize that you couldn't trust public health officials, that you couldn't trust the government or these other agencies, because almost none of them were recognizing veganism as something that we could even do. There was so much propaganda from the dairy industry, for example, that in the 1950s or 60s, to even think that you could survive without drinking cow's milk was a very, very radical concept. And you probably couldn't even find many doctors or health officials that would support you on that. And that is changing today. And part of what's happening with the corporatization of veganism is that it's becoming more acceptable to just be vegan. It's becoming more widely known. But the downside of that is that you don't have to be radical and see the bigger picture of all of the propaganda involved that comes from the meat and dairy industry, that comes from the chemical industry, that comes from Monsanto and these revolving doors with our government agencies. And that's what's really, changing with this. But early on, I think the founders of the vegan movement saw this. And Leslie Cross was one of the early vice presidents of the Vegan Society. And he has a quote that he wrote in 1951 after the founding of the first Vegan Society, where he said that veganism is not so much welfare as it is liberation. And he said it was liberation not just for the animals, but also for the heart and soul of humans, essentially. It liberates us in terms of our physical body and physical health, as well as our mental health. And he viewed it sort of as spiritual enlightenment to no longer be dependent on products of exploitation. But it really showed that the early vegans were incredibly holistic in their thinking. And that's what I think we need more of today. Because
Right now, we live in a system of normalized violence, which is exploiting animals and people and the planet. And this system, it is violent, whether we think about it or not. We are essentially making ourselves oppressors when we separate ourselves from other animals that we share the planet with. And then we are sitting here talking about freedom and bodily autonomy while we are actively enslaving other beings. And then we decide the day that they die, how they die, when they last get to see their babies, whether or not they get to stay connected to their family members. And that is violence. That is oppression. And we are denying other beings the right to their bodies and lives while we sit here and talk about freedom and bodily autonomy for ourselves. And think about what that's doing to our vibration when we are consuming the literal bodies of other beings who were confined and brought into this world without any consent and who were killed without any consent. We're consuming that. So think about what that's doing to us and how we are living in a system that doesn't even recognize it. So from an early age, we also have to desensitize ourselves to the fact that this is violence. We are not innately violent beings. We are compassionate and empathetic. And there's so much conditioning and propaganda from our earliest time. We're driving down the street and there are billboards that are telling us that animals are its, they're objects, they don't matter, they're for us to use and eat, they're tasty. All of these things that have to separate us from our natural empathy. And if you think about a small child and you put a bunny in front of them and an apple, right? That shows that we're naturally empathetic because a small child, unlike, true carnivores like lions, are not gonna pounce on that bunny. They're probably gonna pet the bunny, play with them, think they're cute, and they would probably eat the apple. And we are essentially teaching children not to connect with that. So think about what that's doing to a whole society then, built on this desensitization. And another really good example of how this impacts all of our society is that slaughterhouse workers who have to participate in this desensitization on a daily basis, where they are, taking the life and violently killing another animal, many of them, many per hour, very quickly. They have some of the highest rates of domestic abuse, and animal abuse is highly correlated with domestic abuse and domestic violence. So that's a really good example of how this is impacting not just the animals, but us, when we are participating in this violent system. Not to mention what it does to our personal health and how animal protein is correlated with all of our top killers in the Western world: heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. And that the higher levels of animal protein we eat, the higher levels of chronic disease are correlated across almost all human populations. And then there's, of course, the environmental problems that our meat and dairy industry are causing. We have massive amounts of deforestation. 91% of Amazon deforestation is due to animal agriculture. Now you might say, what about soy and corn production? Yes, there's some of that too. But 90% of soy production in the United States is for animal feed and not for anything related to what humans are eating. So this is killing our planet too. It's polluting our oceans. We're depleting our oceans of the fishes as well. But we have other options. We can choose something different. And this is where the solution comes in and why holistic veganism is so incredibly powerful. We can make a different choice as individuals every single day, 3 times a day. One of the main reasons vegans spend so much time talking about our food system, even though veganism isn't inherently about food, and it's about this ethical principle that we can extend to everything in our lives, is because food is the most significant way in which we all participate in this system of violence every single day. You don't go out and support a circus or buy a pet from a breeder every single day, but we eat 3 times a day. But that means we have incredible power. We as individuals can vote with our dollar, and there's 2 ways that works. One is directly. You are choosing whether to support violence and oppression with every single meal and purchase, or whether you are choosing to participate in a new system of normalized nonviolence. And if you are concerned about the power of Big Pharma right now and how that is impacting our world and lives, the meat and dairy industry is the #1 consumer of Big Pharma. The majority of our antibiotics are used on farm animals because we put them in such horrible conditions. And then they get sick when they're crammed together and treated this way. And so then we feed them lots of drugs and antibiotics, and then that's the meat that people end up eating, and then they get sick from it, and then we too become consumers of Big Pharma because we have chronic illnesses and have to take drugs then. So it's a whole cycle that we can opt out of, and we can choose at any time to stop participating and vote for a new, different system. And it also will help us reconnect with our empathy, reconnect with that childhood compassion that many of us have had to suppress growing up in this system. And we do that by taking a stand and saying, this is what we want to support or not. And it can also heal our bodies physically, because a whole foods plant-based diet is the #1 thing we can do to both prevent and even reverse, in many cases, our chronic illnesses like heart disease. And finally, veganic agriculture. I see a lot of times these get pitted against each other. Local, regenerative, animal-based agriculture versus, corporate vegan agriculture and industrial plant food. They don't have to be pitted against each other at all. We can have the best of both worlds, which is an ethically vegan, animal-free system that is also organic and regenerative and sustainable. That is the agricultural solution that we can all start voting for with our dollar. There are more and more veganic farmers and systems popping up all the time that are the best of both worlds. We do not have to support and be part of a corporate food system to be vegan. They are separate, and we have a better third solution. So finally, I just want to address this really quickly. Some of you might say, well, isn't eating animals natural? That's one of the most common responses I get. And here's the thing, I love natural things. I am very much about natural skincare and vitamins and minerals, because when it comes to that, our development, our evolution hasn't caught up yet with the toxic chemicals and petroleum-based products that we're using in a lot of cases. So they often have more side effects and negative impacts than natural things. But natural is not a good justification for our morals and ethics. Animals do lots of things that we don't want to do as humans. There is rape, there is murder, there is even cannibalism in some species. That's not what we want to be basing a just and free system on that supports bodily autonomy and freedom for all beings. So let's stop using that and start thinking about what is the most non-violent choice in any given moment. How can we daily choose non-violence and support a more sustainable solution to feed the whole world? So thank you very much.